So welcome to session 5A, Sustainability and Built Environment. So I'm Robby Soetanto. I work at Loughborough University, and I'm chairing this session. So we have three papers for this session. We have the first two by Christian and colleagues, and the last one is by Kwaku and his colleagues there. So let's make a start of the recording. Just to let you know that this session will be recorded and will be put on YouTube channel.
My name is Stefan. I'm from Aalborg University, and I'm presenting the paper called The Quandaries Design Development Competitions, which has been co-authored together with three colleagues from Chalmers University of Technology, and that's Christian Koch, Magnus, Rönn, and Braide. The starting point of the paper is the idea or the observation that current urbanization trends, they pose quite several challenges to developing sustainable housing and mitigating climate change. It's issues such as cost versus sustainability, locations versus affordability, and affordability versus architectural quality are some of the issues that are at play when developing social or public housing in urbanized areas. As a consequence, new types of planning and governance mechanisms are needed to balance these issues. And in Sweden, in particular, municipal planners and developers, they attach specific expectations to design developer competitions. So in this paper, we ask the question whether design and developer competitions can function as innovative governance tools to address these issues. And we do so by drawing on two cases from competitions in Swedish construction and focus on the dilemmas they entail. Briefly on design developer competitions, in that type of competition, it's called markanvisningstävling in Swedish. You have a public client that allocates a piece of land and then tenders for proposals for using the land within certain barriers and enablers. And the participants are typically developers and contractors who aim at developing their own business by winning the competition with an architectural design proposal and then construct the buildings on the allocated field. The question from a sustainable transition perspective is whether design developer competitions, they can deliver what planners hope for, and that is sustainable housing and other values such as architectural quality at a fair cost. So we have looked into that in Swedish context, focusing on two critical cases where we have chosen some proposals where the winning proposals are expected to display high degrees of innovation as they build on experiences from completed research and development projects, which has been part of a government push for innovative housing in Sweden. The data consists of land allocation policies and competition programs, proposals, jury statements, assessment templates, design programs, and detailed plans. And in the paper, we try to put these competitions into an overall governance framework perspective and draw on theoretical components such as governance theory and innovation theory, concepts in innovation, competition, transition, and so on, in order to provide an understanding of the role that design developer competitions play. The two cases are the next I'll be presenting. So very briefly about the first one. It's called Botkyrka. It's a suburb to Stockholm. It's in a public housing area developed in the 1960s, and in this area, Botkyrka municipality is interested in. The two cases are the next I'll be presenting. So very. The two cases are the next I'll be presenting. So very briefly about the first one. It's called Botkyrka. It's a suburb to Stockholm. It's in a public housing area developed in the 1960s, and in this area, Botkyrka municipality is interested in making housing where the solutions that are based on design and choice of materials that contributes to sustainability. In the program, we have some evaluation criteria that are weighed and prioritized, with focus on social sustainability and architectural quality, and then also design innovation, environmental sustainability, and economic sustainability, and the offered land price. Interesting in the programs, the criteria, how they're weighted, are not
the two cases are the next I'll be presenting. So very briefly about the first one. It's called Botkirke. It's a suburb to Stockholm. It's a public housing area developed in the 1960s, and in this area,
dense characteristics and positive impact on the area's architecture were seen as decisive in the assessment. So the winning proposal displayed some of these characteristics. Interestingly, however, in the subsequent planning committees, plan for implementing the winning proposals, these low dense characteristics were discarded in favor of more high-rise buildings and less focus on the external environment, which
interesting in the programs, the criteria, how they're weighted are not reported.
The second case is from Stockholm. It's in a mixed housing district from 1926, where the goal is to produce cheap and square meter efficient housing for young people through innovative and smart solutions.
The low dense characteristics, positive impact on areas, architecture was seen as decisive in the assessment. So the winning proposal displayed some of these characteristics. Interestingly, however, in the subsequent planning committees, plan for implementing design of the proposal. In contrast to the first case, the assessment was made through what's called architectural criticism rather than weighting criteria, so that's more open-ended assessment. This competition generated 15 proposals, some of which are considered to new thinking, but it's not stated in any of the jury assessment what the innovative solutions actually are. Rather, the winner is chosen after an overall assessment of the quality and shortcomings of the project in general. So it's not the number of departments, nor the rent level that decides the competition. It's on basis of architecture, which stands out, which the jury perceives as being innovative and exemplary, that the first prize winner is decided. Interestingly, it's what then is innovative or exemplary. So the jury's idea about architectural quality is decisive in the assessment of this competition. We then progress to the comparative discussion. We discuss 7, 8 different issues in the paper, but we focus on 4 here, which are common for both cases. So what we see is when it comes to the coordination of the competition conditions, there are no clear coordination between the objectives of the competitions, the submission requirements, and the assessment criteria. When it comes to the ranking and the specific assessment criteria, we see that the assessment of the proposals is based on open and interpretive criteria, which is something that gives the jury room for maneuver in selecting winners. When it comes to submission requirements, we see that they are loosely linked to goals and evaluation criteria, and that there are no specified requirements for participants to report on what is actually innovative in their own solutions. And that brings us to the final issue, namely that we see that the municipal perhaps a bit bluntly say, they seem to be blind to the role of being innovator, and instead leave innovation entirely into the hands of the private companies. So based on these preliminary findings from our preliminary research project, which continues hopefully for the next few years, we have identified 4 dilemmas in design developer competitions that form our conclusions. So first of all, the organizer's dilemma, how to set a frame for innovation in the program phase. And there we see that in this case and these 2 cases, we have underdeveloped competition rules, which results in simplified descriptions of the competitions.
And we also see that clients do not really perceive their own role as innovator throughout the process. So the organizer's dilemma it deals with those issues. When it comes to the design team's dilemma, it deals with how to understand the brief and translate requirement into solutions. And here we see that a lack of transparency makes it difficult for the competition teams to get a clear picture about what is actually supposed to be contained in the proposals and how the evaluations is carried out. When it comes to the professional dilemma of how to support design teams' work with innovations, we see that design teams are not compensated for making innovative solutions and for forming their own project teams. That's something that is left entirely into the hands of the private companies in the sector. So there's no real support for the design teams' work with the innovations. Finally, on the jury's dilemma on how to develop and appraise identified solutions, what we see is that there's no documentation of the competitions by the organizers, and there's no real support for dissemination, diffusion of innovations into the industry. So those were very briefly the contents of the paper. So thank you for paying attention, and hopefully if you read the paper or have some questions, we'll be more than happy to answer those. So thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'll change into discussion mode so everyone can participate in the discussion. First, I'd like to invite question from the floor. If there's any question for Christians and Stefan. No. Yeah, it's interesting presentation. I think it's design decision makings. I mean, you know, I'm sort of alien to you know, these topics somehow, but you know how this design developer competition actually being implemented in Denmark or in your place. What kind of projects under design normally under design developer competitions?
It would usually be agglomerated housing and buildings, apartment buildings. So it would quite often be what you could call a district, right? I mean, an area where there had been some kind of a pre-planning, and the municipality is asking for a certain number of apartments in certain size and so on. But there is also variation. I mean, in principle, the municipality can also choose to use it for developing offices or in an industrial district or stuff like that. So, I mean, if they own a piece of land, they can basically decide what they want to ask for being done on this particular piece.
So we have earlier discussion about value of land. I mean, so in terms of the whole scheme of things, you know, to what extent that's contribute to the discussion about relationship with the value of land.
Sorry, I didn't get your question. Was it?
Yeah, so we have in the plenary session we talk about value of land, and you know how the earlier decision making process actually can shape sustainability agenda in the developments. And one of the things that you mentioned there, some of the dilemma is about decision making on certain things that involve the stakeholders throughout the design process. And I guess that's the kind of thing that might emerge in your research, future research. I'm just wondering, you know, what do you find in terms of you know, the importance and the role of this decision making process, decision that being made in the early stages to ensure or to get more sustainable outcome.
Well, that's, quite a big question. I think what we saw in these two competitions were quite a variety of different elements that were taken into consideration in the decision. So obviously we have the companies that also compete for one of the main criteria in both cases that we've studied is the square meter price. So obviously that has to be at a certain level because it's public housing and it should be affordable housing for everyone. But what we saw in those two cases is that it was not the cost or the cost of accommodation that actually had the upper hand in the assessments of the winner of these competitions. What we try to do in the paper is to say, okay, there are basically two different types of evaluations at play in the assessment of these two different projects. So one of them is based on more quantitative criteria and requirements, and another one is based much more on something called architectural criticism, so that by an architect, which entails more qualitative assessments of the characteristics and the architectural quality of the buildings. And I think what we just try to focus on in this paper is to say that in these particular cases, there is in the decision-making process perhaps a lack of transparency when it comes to pinpointing exactly why certain proposals are deemed better than other proposals. And in particular, what we tried to look at was that the sustainability requirements, that was both in terms of the social sustainability, the economic sustainability, and the environmental sustainability. And what we also found there was that also the design teams were grappling with this idea about, okay, what actually constitutes innovative or sustainable solutions on the different areas. So I think it was, a bit of a mess, but Magnus, which is one of the co-authors, has been working together with you actually, looking at more different cases where it seems to be a bit more transparent, that decision-making process.
Yeah. So what comes up when we start looking at more cases is actually that occasionally the organizers, the municipality, is indeed elaborating far more on the sustainability dimension. And it appears that when they do that, we end up in another extreme of the dilemma where they are almost prescribing solutions, whereas in these cases, in this paper, what we see here is an under-prescription of any dimension of sustainability, which actually leads to something close to greenwashing, right? So if you have a charging place for an electrical car on this in this district, then it's sustainable, right? I mean, I'm making a caricature now, but to illustrate the very big bandwidth in terms of posing criteria and obtaining sustainability through these competitions, there is quite a bandwidth there. I mean, and it has been widening while we are going into other competitions elsewhere, apart from those two we presented here.
Yeah. Well, to my understandings, I think with your focus of the work is very much geared up for sort of bespoke solutions to a building, to development of a building. If I'm right to say that. Mm-hmm. I think in the Transforming Construction Initiative in the UK, we kind of been led to believe that off-site, off-the-shelf solution is the way forward. That is, really building from using off-site component, manufacturing the factories and so forth. And maybe so how that sort of movement, in terms of moving to off-site solution, going to address or going to reconnect or connect with your dilemmas.
I think actually one of the cases was off-site manufacturing. The idea was that when we followed these two cases, we started by looking at, because in both cases we had some actors that had received government funding to do innovative solutions for housing, and in one of the cases they used
that solution that they had developed, that innovative off-site manufactured solution, and entered one of the competitions with that, and they actually didn't win, even though they were cheaper. And it was difficult to see in the assessments why they didn't win with that particular solution. And I think it was in that case that was based on architectural criticism that had a more holistic approach to the assessment. But they won another case in the same city of Stockholm a bit later on. So I mean, it's a case of on-site manufacturing that lowered the cost, but still didn't live up to, well, whatever expectations that the developers had with this particular housing area. So I don't think off-site manufacturing necessarily will change anything.
No, I mean, it's maybe also important to point to that off-site manufacturing of wooden houses, modular designed wooden housing is quite well established in Sweden, right? It's probably around 20% of this market, and the manufacturers behind that, they are players in these competitions alongside with everybody else, and they do already play a strong role. So in a sense, that segment where you talk especially affordable, where you talk maybe locations which are less attractive and so on, there you would definitely find the industrial manufacturing-oriented, off-site-oriented players being very strong. So I mean, you can even speculate of a cuckoo's nest effect where because some of them are getting this big, others are actually pushed out of that market. So it's not even sure that it will become bigger in the future in Sweden. But that's of course speculation. I'm just saying that in a sense we could claim that this transition in that segment has already been carried out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks Christian and Stefan. And you mentioned that you carry on this line of research, and I hope that I can learn more from the finding in the next year. So let's move on to the next presentation. Let's move to presentation mode. Yeah, so again, this presentation is by Christian.
Hi, and thank you for joining us for this session. I'm going to present to you a joint paper from Dimos Kivukeris and me, Christian Koch. Dimos is from Chalmers University of Technology, and I'm from Halmstad University. We have called our paper Heavy Duty Construction Equipment, Dinosaurs of Black Energy. We are worried that the industry are still investing in diesel engines to a very high degree, even if those are compliant with EU regulation, which is getting ever stricter. They're still far from clean. And at the same time, we are told by the industry that cleaner technologies like electrical engines, they are too expensive. They are expensive investments. So there is clear signals that transitioning of these machines sustainably will involve changing technologies, business models, and even public regulation. So this paper analyzes enablers and barriers for sustainable transition of the civil engineering construction equipment to electrical machines in a particular focus on Scandinavia. Our theoretical approach is transition theory. This is a social material interpretive understanding of sustainable transition. It is a theory where sustainable transition is understood as a negotiated process of interaction between actors in materiality technology. It's also a perspective that asks us to make a broad elaboration on and coverage of stakeholders from niches of innovative companies over national incumbent regimes of government and the large corporations to an international landscape of stakeholders. And clearly, in this context, the multinational manufacturers of construction equipment like Caterpillar, Hitachi, and so on are important players. Finally, the transition theory also asks us to adopt a longitudinal processual perspective. Sustainable transition takes time. Our method is basically a desk study combined with a few interviews, and we focus on 3 cities: Gothenburg, Copenhagen, and Oslo, representing 3 different Scandinavian national contexts. We have used also a snowballing approach to identify the relevant stakeholders, and in particular Norway. This showed to take us beyond what we expected. The network around the emission-free building sites and the emission-free machines were far more extensive than we saw. So very briefly, the 3 cases we discussed in the paper. First, Gothenburg, which we characterize as still waiting, despite a very heated urban growth and a construction market with a lot of projects. We still haven't seen any emission-free projects run in Gothenburg. We have seen, as I described here, both national and local preparations for it, but we are still waiting for the emission-free projects machines to become important in the building industry in Gothenburg. When it comes to Copenhagen, we saw in 2019 that the municipality of Copenhagen, together with the local electricity company, tendered a project which was an electricity cable renovation project, which was framed as emission-free. And they hired a well-known collaboration partner, a local contractor, who never had worked with electrical machine before, but with an alliance with a machine rental company, they were able to meet the demands from the municipality. At the same time, the rental company actually invested in a series of electrical vacuum machines, which was suitable to this particular project. We also saw in 2020 that the national program of the climate partnerships, the tripartite initiative of the Danish government, that this came to contain the policy of emission-free building sites and civil machines. In 2020, we also saw another project running, which was a daycare institution, and this was also carried out with the municipality of Copenhagen in the context of a strategic partnership. So when we turn to Oslo, it becomes clear why Copenhagen is seen as a more pattern transition. We call Oslo a cluster transition. In 2016, the Norwegian state issued a number of support programs for subsidies of promoting fossil-free and electrical machines. And from 2016 to 18, a number of Norwegian municipalities carried out pre-investigations and dialogue with the civil construction sector. Some of these pre-investigations concluded that the machines were not on the market and that biodiesel was a realistic alternative, but others took steps further. And this support also led to machine suppliers with local offices to start rebuilding of the more heavy civil machines. And in 2018, Pond Equipment and Nasta was both able to launch heavy construction machines, a 25 tons belt excavator, an 8 and a 16 tons machine.
Okay, so I'll change to discussion mode, so everyone can.
So our material shows us 3 cases on different steps in a sustainable transition process.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. Let's repeat again. Anyway, I think we are okay. Okay, I'll invite to the floor if there is any questions to Christians and Demosthenes.
Yes.
Okay, I think I can make a start here. It's an interesting presentation that really bring me to an issue about electric vehicles and how can it be adopted and implemented in the industries, and the issue about subsidies, and which really not entirely reflect the true cost of transitions to electric vehicles. And also in terms of carbon reduction, there is an issue about embodied carbon in the creation of the electric power machinery itself. So I'm just wondering, you mentioned about business model, but what kind of business model, that perhaps companies or small manufacturers of different component of this electric power machinery is going to be adopt to engage in the process or to facilitate the adoptions of these electric power machineries.
I hope I understood your question. I mean, first I want to point to that in the present situation, it is quite large manufacturers who I would characterize it reluctantly they are engaging in building electrical machines, right? So we're talking Caterpillar, we're talking Volvo Construction Equipment, we're talking Hitachi, we're talking Magnus. And if I did not do that in this paper, but if you will compare their investment program in new machines that they're doing, I would say characterize it as 95% is diesel driven, right? So you actually see a very reluctant change of these large companies. Yet on the other hand, in the Norwegian case, there is actually a volume by now of heavy electrical machines on the Norwegian market. And we see the adoption of even small contractors. And I do explain it quite simply with that their main clients, the municipalities in the southern Norway, are demanding these years, right? So the reason why the medium-sized...
Hi, and thank you for joining us for this session. I'm going to present to you you a joint paper.
Can you hear me? Adoption is actually running. I think Pon is claiming in Norway that they have up around 100 heavy machines by now in operation. So it is actually coming, this transition. But if the large manufacturers of machines would carry out a transition of their programs of machines, then of course that would weigh a lot more. Actually, in Scandinavia, the purchasing of diesel engines has skyrocketed the last 3 years, right? So the traditional machines are highly proliferated on the market, even new ones. So I hope that answered your question, Robby.
Yeah, I think in terms of what you say about public and private partnerships, in this case is very, very relevant. I mean, I can, given that you said 95% of the future development is a diesel engine machinery, that means that there is, the manufacturers of this machinery do not see if there is any demand in the future. But at the same time, how can the public sector actually subsidize this for the benefit of the public, and that's something that So how can we go back again to the issue about business model? How can we create a business model that perhaps minimize the subsidy? I mean, the public subsidy cannot carry on. At some point, it has to go. And what kind of business model that sort of enabling a process of reducing public subsidy.
Well, I think that for the time being, the rebuild to electrical machines is the business model there is to demand a price for such a rebuilt machine, which is way over the actual costs. So it's the price is double of a diesel engine or something like that, right? And so the present business model is to keep the electrical machine as a luxury good, so to speak, if you know what I mean by that. So it's kind of to change the business model, the main force I can see for doing that would be regulation. It would be to put far stricter demands on emissions, for example, in the urban environment, in the inner cities, and it would be to put far stricter demands on large infrastructure investments that the national states are doing, like roads, tunnels, and so on, and actually demand that they use the machines because the technology is there. I see that as the main factor of driving the business model in a new direction.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. It's more like an observation, I suppose. I was trying to think about how you stimulate the demand, and I think regulation, policy, subsidies are obviously a major part of that. I was thinking about the car industry, the mass volume car industry, and it's clear in the last sort of 5-10 years that the governments have been a bit superseded by the technology. The development of the battery, the development of the electric battery has come quicker and the conversion of the big corporations to actually want to invest in battery power electric cars kind of come quicker than many governments had anticipated. Hence, our infrastructure is still going to be behind the technology, if you like. Do you think that the potential is there for that to happen in this sector where the market stimulates, the technology becomes, as you say, it's probably there already? Or do you think there's more need for government interaction?
Can I offer a comment here?
Yeah, go ahead, Timo.
I would say that while there are some connections, the market of electrical vehicles, electric cars for citizens is quite different from the market of electric vehicles for construction sites. Construction sites are a much more controlled environment. I mean, yes, we have discussed numerous times in the construction management context how not controlled they may be, but I mean, they are much more controlled environments than the various individual lives of individual citizens who may use their cars for whatever. So since they are, if we have electric machines that are booked by or leased or even bought by companies or construction sites to do specific tasks, even if technology supersedes policy, I think that this kind of control and dedicated processes and tasks that these machines do may actually help in legislation more than the random use of individual privately owned electric cars.
Okay,
maybe.
It's actually, I mean, right now, while we're discussing, I would say that the lack of power infrastructure is also a barrier, and this goes back to the planners who focus on electrical cars and to some extent electrical trucks, but they do not plan a charging structure who can support the civil engineering, right? So actually, several of the Norwegian cases I studied, they show that it is the lack of power infrastructure which stops the change, right? So I suppose that's another way to phrase my answer to your hope for and aspirations for a more self-going mechanism around this, right? If the manufacturers in Norway, for example, started mass producing their machines, right? And they started offering at a price which is reflecting the costs, right? Then that would really start something running, right? But they don't do that now. They exploit a protected and small market and overprice their products right now, right? So we still haven't seen the protection bubble going away. So we still have to wait for that break. And I'm not sure I can point to exactly what would make the difference. It would be great to see, but yeah. And can I just comment on Leon's point? I mean, because Leon is saying in the chat that it's a lot about investments, and yes, it definitely is about investment. I mean, you have, as I said, a sky-high investment of traditional diesel engines in Scandinavia, higher than for a long time, more than 10 years back. And of course, there is a binding for the contractors in having traditional diesel engines, and you can just hope for that the infrastructure investments in the Scandinavian countries over the next years will mean that they will need more machines than the one they already have, and that part of the market could then maybe be fertile for electrical machines. But that's a bit of a hope. Yeah. I mean, my colleague is writing to me here. Let's remember the possibility of public-private partnership in this area. I mean, who says that the machines has to be owned by the machine rental companies, or for that matter, the contractors? They could be a shared resource, and they could be offered by municipalities, regions, and so on, which is actually something we have seen in Norway and also previously in Denmark. But so that another intervention road in terms of making some kind of proactive regulation could actually be to arrange that kind of pooling of resources and sharing the resources of the electric.
Very good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your discussion and contribution to discussion from Leon as well. So let's move on to the next presentations. So I change to presentation mode now.
I'm Dr. Kwaku Agbesi, presenting on the topic Implementation Challenges of Sustainable Procurement Practices in Public Sector Organizations in Ghana. This presentation will follow the following outline. introduction, research method, results and discussions, and finally conclusions. Introduction. The construction industry is considered to be one of the most important sectors for the adoption of sustainable development principles as said by Gade and Opoku 2020. And it has been found out that sustainable procurement can be one of the major avenues to address sustainability issues in the construction industry. The implementation of sustainable procurement principles in the construction industry can result in a number of benefits in the form of social, economic, and environmental benefits to organizations, individuals, and end users. However, the implementation of sustainable procurement in the construction industry has been a big challenge, and most organizations in the industries are struggling in the adoption and implementation of sustainable procurement and lags behind other industries. Ghana has made strides in the adoption and the implementation of sustainable procurement practices. Recently, the Public Procurement Act was amended to include environmental issues in the procurement issues of Ghana. However, in adoption of sustainable procurement in Ghanaian organizations has resulted in significant drawbacks affecting the full implementation of sustainable procurement practices. The construction industry should identify and deal with various challenges that are encountered in the adoption of sustainable procurement practices. And these challenges are said to be differ from one organization, from one industry to another industry, from one nation to another nation, and from one sector to another sector. Hence, this study tries to investigate the implementation challenges of sustainable procurement practices in public sector construction organizations in Ghana. This research adopted a quantitative research approach and used questionnaire survey to solicit information on the challenges of sustainable procurement implementations in Ghana. The 5-point Likert scale measurement was used to get respondents to rate 12 challenges that were identified in literature. To analyze the data collected and collated, the SPSS version 18 was used to compute the mean score values of the various challenges that were identified in literature. To group likewise and similar challenges together, exploratory factor analysis approach was used to group them, as I earlier said, to have similar factors in one particular group. The questionnaires were distributed to 193 respondents from 143 organizations, which resulted in a valid responses of 123, representing 63.7 response rate. The factor analysis resulted in 3 main groups of the 12 implementation challenges that were identified in literature. 4 of the factors were grouped under capacity, and these factors were limited knowledge and skills of employees, lack of awareness of sustainable procurement, lack of training of procurement officers, lack of understanding of sustainability and its link to procurement. Financial had also 4 factors: lack of funding, perceived high cost of sustainability, perceived trade-off between sustainability and cost, restrictions on expenditures and budget. For leadership, regulations, policies and attitude, we had the inability to incorporate sustainability into standard procurement processes, lack of a clear direction and commitment from organizational leaders, insufficient and confusing guidance, lack of regulation policies and strategies. Results indicated that public organizations strongly agreed on the factors that were identified from literature. As we can see from the previous table, factor 3, that is leadership, regulations, policies, attitude and culture, was the main challenge to sustainable procurement implementation in the consortium organizations that were surveyed. And this gives a clear indication that we need to work more on regulations and policies as far as the implementation of sustainable procurement in consortium in Ghana is concerned. And another factor that came up strongly was the financial factors. It means that government need to do more in the area of providing resources to these public organizations so that they can build the capacities of the professionals in there, also do more training and enhance the adoption and implementation of sustainable procurement in these organizations. The last factor that came up was capacity. And as I said earlier, the capacity of the professionals in these organizations need to be built more so that we can have a smooth implementation of sustainable procurement in consortium in Ghana. Conclusion. This study has also confirmed the previous research by other authors that the consortium industry lags behind other sectors in the adoption and implementation of sustainable procurement practices. Therefore, it is recommended that to accelerate the implementation of sustainable procurement practices in Ghana, government should provide incentives like subsidies and tax exemptions to encourage public sector organizations to adopt sustainable procurement in consortium. This means that when governments give the green light for these public sector organizations to have subsidies and tax exemptions, this can be granted to contracted suppliers, and we believe this can enhance the implementation of sustainable procurement. And this government department, ministries, and agencies also needs to integrate sustainable procurement into their policies, strategies, and goals. And in conclusion, we need to have a standard procurement document that include sustainable procurement practices in the core of tenders, in evaluation of tenders and contracts, and we believe this will help contractors, consultants, and suppliers to assist in the smooth implementation of sustainable procurement in Ghana. Thank you very much for your audience.
Thank you for presentation. So go into discussion mode. Yeah, it was an interesting finding, and I think I sort of agree with the first factors or the first finding about leaderships and cultural and attitudes regulation. So I'm just wondering, how would you take it forward? I mean, particularly on the first component, first factors, because there are lots of actually within that within that factors, and regulations, cultures and attitude, perhaps is are different things, and wondering why the funding is being lumped together into just one factors. Hello, Kwaku? Kwaku? Kwaku, are you there? Kwaku, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Did you hear my...
Please, the question again. I had internet challenges at the question again.
Fine, yeah. So my question is related to your first component or factors. And because that's quite a lot of, quite a lot of issue being lumped together. I'm just wondering how you take it further and how you validate the first component. I mean, the first component includes leadership, regulations, culture, attitudes, and that's could be completely different things. And why is it lumped together? And how would you take it forward?
Yes, as I said earlier in the presentation, we found them to be similar. For example, when you talk of leadership, it has an element of an attitude and style of the leader. So we thought, considering the situation in Ghana, where we are at the early stage of sustainable procurement, the issue of leadership, attitude, and regulation comes in a particular manner, and when those issues are addressed together, we believe we can move sustainable procurement implementation forward than we have now.
So how are you going to take this forward? Are you going to talk to the governments, or are you going? I mean, what is the practical or further steps from your research?
Yes, what we tend to do is to engage the local government organizations, especially the district assemblies, to buy into the culture of sustainable procurement, ensure that those procurement issues are included in call for tenders, specifications, and agreements. Fortunately for us, quite recently, the Public Procurement Authority that regulates public procurement in Ghana has come out with a standard tender document that tries to address the issue of social and environmental sustainability practices. So we are of the view that as we do more to engage practitioners at both at the local and the central level of government, we can really move the idea of sustainable procurement in consult. As we speak now, it's not well developed, apart from organizations that implement projects that are funded by multinational organizations like the World Bank and African Development Bank. They do much of address much of sustainability in their procurement compared to projects that are funded by government of Ghana. So we are of the belief that the more we do more engagement through our professional association and also engage in the actors at the local level, you will be able to move sustainable procurement in consortium faster than what we have now.
Mm-hmm. Just wondering if there is any question from the floor. No. Perhaps my last question. You mentioned about validation. How would you do a validation here? What are you going to validate?
We think to move this research forward, we might have to do a case study to really validate the outcomes of the findings and see how organizations that are really implementing sustainable procurement are addressing some of the issues of sustainability and some of the enablers and the barriers that they are facing. I'm a practitioner myself, and I can associate myself with some of these challenges, especially at the local level, where poverty is very prevalent, and people come off with the problem trade-off between sustainability and cost. And you are much concerned to do projects at a lower cost, which we all know rather create more issues than if we had addressed the issue of sustainability at the early stage of design and production of infrastructure projects.
So, your finding, I mean, would you expect similar finding will be found in a similar study in the region?
Please, can you come again?
So, in terms of your finding, because leaderships and regulation and attitude and culture is a big thing, and always it's been found as one of the underlying factors when you wish to implement sustainability agenda. Would you expect a similar result if you run similar study in other country in the region? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. The issue of culture and attitude is a very key issue as far as sustainability is concerned. People think sustainability issue is not an issue until you really get to them to appreciate the need to protect the future. And in Africa in particular, culture is a key thing. Culture is everything. Values, organizational values, it's everything. So I believe there's a similar study that I read about Nigeria, and most of the factors that were validated in Ghana were also found to be some of the challenges in the implementation of sustainable procurement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we come to the end of our session. So I wish to thank Christian, Stefan, Demosthenes, and Kwaku for for the presentations and for Craig as well for meeting the session. And good luck, and hope to see you in the next opportunity. Okay.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye bye, everyone.